we're good.
Fire away.
Okay, could you please state your name and when and where you were born, please?
William A. Miller, born here in Lima, Ohio, the year that Memorial Hospital opened, 1937,
Very good.
July the 2nd. I just had my 84th birthday.
Excellent. Could you tell a little bit about your kind of time here, schooling and such and all this as to in Lima?
Well, I went to 5 different grade schools, I think. My dad rented houses. He came through the Depression and he was opposed to borrow money from the banks, so we only rented houses. And he rented the houses on the basis of how cheap the rent was, not on whether or not it satisfied the family's needs. So anyway, I started out at 319 Harrison Avenue, and then when I was 4 years old, we moved to my grandma's house on 900 East Franklin Street. And we were kind of on hard times, and my mother was called on to help with my grandma, who was bedridden with heart disease.
And actually you brought up something about South and such and all this, and I know the football rivalry back in that time. I'm kind of curious.
Well, I told me about my dad's rented houses.
Right.
We started out, I was born at 319 Harrison.
Right.
Then we moved to Grandma's house, 900 East Franklin.
Right.
And I entered first grade when I lived there at Washington School. And then we left there when I entered second grade, and we moved over on Fairview Avenue, which is a block and a half from Grandpa Bates's house.
Okay.
You'll know where that was,
Right.
1100 East 2nd Street. Well then, we moved again back to Harrison Avenue, and I went to McKinley one year,
Right.
and then I went back to Washington the last 2 years of grade school. And the only advantage for going to all those grade schools was when I entered South High in the 7th grade, I already knew all the kids.
Okay. Okay.
Because I'd been in all 3 different schools. Yeah. Well, I went to high school and graduated 56th in my class of 176.
Excellent.
And I thought I was college material, and I had taken college preparatory courses. But I worked hard to save my money and had enough money for 1 semester at Bowling Green.
Oh, okay.
And anyway, I fizzled at Bowling Green. They had me covered up with 21 credit hours. And all you had to be a full-time student was 13. And they told me at the time they had entered 1,300 students as freshmen at Bowling Green in 1955, fall 55, and that only 450 would survive to be sophomores.
Okay.
So that meant they intended to flunk out 850 students. Well, that kind of left a bitter taste in my mouth.
Sure.
But, so I went home, tail between my legs, and my dad understood, and he went very easy on me. But my mother, she got all heady and called me names and told me I was lazy, and she'd come to my bedroom door and say, "Get out of that bed, you lazy lummox, and go get yourself a job." Well, I actually only had 90 days before I got a job. From when I came home from college and I got a job, it was only 90 days. Seemed like 5 years of my mother yelling at me.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that how you got into photography, or?
Yeah, I got a job on the basis of my experience at Mac Camera Store. I got a job at Neon Products as a photography assistant. And what we did there was we made 6 screen stencils for the sign painting business.
Okay.
And I and the guy I worked for, we did black and white photography of the sign faces, and we made 8x10 glossy prints of the sign faces. So I only worked there 11 months, and they didn't have enough work for 3 people in the photo lab. So my boss said, well, if you don't have work to do, just keep out of sight. And I thought, well, this is no job at all. I want to work, and I want a job doing constructive things, you know. And
Right.
so I said, well, why don't you lay me off, and I'll draw unemployment while I look for another job. He says, is that what you want to do? And I said, absolutely, yes. So that's what I did. So I went from probably October of 57 until February 18th, 57, and I hired in at Westinghouse.
Okay.
And my black and white darkroom experience allowed me to go right to work as a darkroom technician.
Could you describe a little bit more about Westinghouse and all?
Well,
I mean, what they produce, or what you were working on?
Westinghouse was primarily a defense product company, and we built electrical systems for land, space, and air, and land, sea, and air. Anyway, we built generators, alternators, circuit breakers, control panels, regulators for aircraft.
Right.
And we had most of the contracts on the military fighter aircraft and bombers, and we had quite a few commercial contracts. For instance, we produced the generator and the electrical system on the DC-8 and the DC-9, DC-10,
Right.
McDonnell Douglas.
Right.
And fighter aircraft, we did the Phantom and, I don't know, the Harrier and, oh,
Was some of this top secret type stuff at the time
many
frame?
of them.
Was any of this top secret at the time frame, or
Yeah, well, I had to have
a clearance?
a security clearance
Okay.
that they filed for me. And the security clearance came in handy later on because I went to work as a vendor for the tank plant, and I already had the clearance, so that helped me there. Yeah. Well, Westinghouse they were a very nice place to work, and they had, you didn't get dirty working there.
Okay.
It's all clean work. And
Westinghouse also ended up with some NASA stuff.
yeah, we did some. For instance, I worked on the Apollo program. There were 300,000 people that worked on the Apollo space shot program, the moon shot. And 2 years before they actually fired the rocket, I started photographing artwork for the printed circuit boards that went in a device that we made called an inverter.
Okay.
There were 11 boards in that inverter, and I photographed those boards on a big process camera that was 6 feet tall and 15 feet long, and 4:1 artwork, and reduce it down to 1:1. And I photographed them twice a week for 2 years
Okay.
before they actually made the shot. I believe it was on August 12th, 1969 is when they walked on the moon. There's a story about Neil Armstrong.
Okay.
I better not tell it to you.
Oh, go ahead.
It's a little bit risky.
Well, clean up the language maybe a little bit. It'd be kind of interesting. I think Brittany especially would be.
Well, he walked on the moon. He said, that's one small step for man and then one giant leap for mankind.
Right.
And then he said, good luck, Mr. Gorski.
Ah, yes.
So everybody wondered what he meant by that. And he just smiled whenever anybody asked him. Until years later, Mr. Gorski and Mrs. Gorski had both been long deceased. Somebody asked him, and he said, well, Gorskis were my next door neighbor. And he said, one time, we played a lot of ball on the street. One time, we hit the ball into their yard, and I went in to retrieve it. And he said, as I picked up the ball, I heard Mr. and Mrs. Gorski arguing in the window with an open screen door, or a screened-in window. And I heard her say, Gorski says, you want sex? You'll have sex when the kid next door walks on the moon.
Okay.
So that's why he said, good luck, Mr. Gorski.
There you go. I like that.
Yeah.
Were there any other projects out at Westinghouse that you photographed that really kind of stood out in your mind or your memory?
Yeah, we did the shuttle too.
Okay.
We had inverter on the shuttle, and we had things called, little devices called RPC, which is short for remote power controllers.
Okay.
There were 21 of those on each shuttle vehicle, and one inverter. And so we were involved in that. And we did a lot of early work on the miniaturization of electronics.
Oh, okay.
So they were innovative in that respect. They had a clean room, and they produced little printed circuits that were like 1 inch square, you know.
Right.
We had little gold leads that were like 1/20th the thickness of a human hair.
Okay.
So they did a lot of exotic work. They were a leading edge research and development center. We had like, at their peak they had 450 engineers,
Right.
and they only had like 300 people on the production staff.
Okay.
So they were design and build research and development
Okay.
firm. Well, when I got let out because they were heavily unionized, and union controlled the shop and union controlled the salaried workers. So you didn't get recognized or you didn't get a raise for merit, you only got it for longevity.
Okay.
And that's weakness in the unionized systems. Well, anyway, the guy that was ahead of me, I had worked under him for like 9 years, and he really wasn't much interested in doing the work. So what he wanted to do was sit at his desk, smoke cigarettes, and read magazines.
Okay.
So as I progressed along, he kept delegating more and more and more and more of his work to me. And I didn't think anything of it at the time because I was learning so much. Well, what that attitude on his part did for me was made me proficient at all the tasks that I called on to undertake. So that was a big boost for me when I went business for myself. However, when I went business for myself, I only used about 20% of the things that I knew how to do.
When did you start your business and all this industrial photo and such?
I started my own business January the 1st, 1971, and operated for 36 years. And I got laid off November the 30th, 1970 was my last day.
Okay.
And as happened in many corporations, they always lay off the people that do the work,
Of course.
and they keep the slackers, you know, and make them supervisors, foremen, and union officials,
Of course.
you know.
When did you first become affiliated with the museum?
Oh gosh, I started working for Mr. Percy before I had any connection to the museum. Mr. Percy had the archives, the railroad archives, originally, after the loco closed. Mr. Percy had the negative files. So he had been using photo finishers of Lima, and they closed their doors, and the two main people there died, and so he was hard pressed for somebody to do the work. So somebody told him about me, and he started bringing me the negatives. I had a good relationship with Mr. Percy, and he was intellectual and high caliber person, high quality man. And he introduced me to his missus one time when I delivered something out to his house. He said, "This is the queen of 313 Singleton Avenue.
There you go.
He wanted me to meet her."
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, did you ever deal with, before you're dealing with ours and all, glass plate negatives? I've always wondered how they were to handle and all, how you handled that glass plate.
Well, I made a Rube Goldberg setup, and I had a contact printer that consisted of a metal base, a half-inch of sponge rubber on the top of it, and then a piece of plate glass that came down on top of that. And I would leave the plate glass top off and put the photographic paper on the sponge base, and then put a piece of glass negative right on that. And then I used an enlarger, like a pinpoint light source. I closed the aperture down to a real small opening, and then exposed the paper through the glass plate.
Okay.
And then I processed it, developed it normally.
And I know, of course, you've photographed various businesses and people and events throughout town. Are there any that you sort of like to highlight on them that are kind of memorable?
I did all the black and white printing and color slide work for Teledyne Ohio Steel.
Okay.
I did all the photography work for the last 10 years that Clark Equipment operated, of all their construction equipment. And they'd introduce a new product about 3 or 4 times a year. And every time they introduced a new product, I had a big photographic job, shooting all the features of the product and producing a booklet that was a maintenance manual on the machine. And so we made color slides and printed those booklets for the people that bought the machines. Anyway, every time they introduced a new machine, I got $5,000 worth of work.
Not bad.
So that was, they were probably my most lucrative customer, and I did a lot of color printing, made lots and lots of color prints for them. And they were 50% of the justification for me to buy a $25,000 roller transport color processor.
Okay.
And I could then produce at a lower cost and do it all myself. And when you shoot negatives and you have to send them out, the people that are printing them, they weren't there, they didn't see what the product looked like. So they have a hard time making the colors match and doing a satisfactory job. So
Right.
nothing beats being able to do it yourself
Sure.
because you were in on the job from the beginning to the end. So I preferred finishing all my own work.
That makes sense.
And I did that for the last 25 years of my business. I finished all my own work. And I had a darkroom technician that worked with me, Dave Frick, and he was with me 10 years. And I hired the artist out of Clark Equipment when they closed in '81, and he worked with me for 8 years. And Dave Frick worked 10 years, and Ron Oder 8 years. But we had a real going concern there for the better part of 20 years.
Right.
Then industry started to close.
Right.
Clark closed, and the highest steel got busted up, and well, I don't know, Lime Electric closed, and
Right.
a lot of my customers closed. Yeah. So I picked up some work at Procter & Gamble, and I picked up some work from construction companies. After most of the industry closed and the two Westinghouse divisions closed, I needed a new source of work.
Right.
So I started calling on contractors and architects, and I got two big contacts where they worked out well. One was Schnippel Contracting out of Botkins, Ohio, and the other was Peterson Construction Company. And they both built schools all over the state of Ohio and maybe most of the Midwest. So I got to photograph schools,
Okay.
both from the ground and from the air, for both of those construction companies.
What's it like taking aerial shots and all? I mean, is it a little more awkward or?
Well, I never liked it because I got sick every time I went out,
Okay.
air sick. And if I couldn't get the shots done in 45 minutes, then it wasn't going to happen
Okay.
because I'd get sick after 45 minutes.
Right.
Well, if I had to do something in a far off place, I would have the pilot fly the plane to the local airport there, and I would drive there and meet him, and then board the plane, shoot the pictures, then back to my car and come home. So I worked out well. And later on in my career, I got tired of doing that entirely because I thought it's just not worth getting sick and then losing the whole day and half of the next day.
Right.
So I hired a guy out of Dayton, and his name is Joel Kane, and that's all he did was aerial photography.
Okay.
So I hired him, but he shot everything on 35 millimeter, which is color slide size negatives, and that really wasn't adequate. I needed large format. So I'd have him fly into Allen County, and I'd hand him my camera with 120, professional 120 film in it, and then he'd go up, shoot the pictures on my camera, then he'd land and hand me the camera and the film, and then I'd process it and make the prints.
Okay.
So it worked out real well.
Right.
I used him probably 7 or 8 years. near the end of my career. Yeah.
Were there any other, say, gatherings and all, whether through the city or private individuals and all this that you remember that were sort of memorable?
We had an Industrial Photographers Association, which was a recognized subsidiary of the Professional Photographers of America. And I served in all the offices of that organization once or twice, from secretary to the president. And we had like 30 members of people that were involved in photographic work. Although some of them were industrial photographers, and all the newspaper photographers all joined. And so we had a real active group there, but eventually after all the industry closed and Lima Citizen closed, and then it kind of died away. But we probably operated 20 years, something like that. Yeah.
Now, if I recall right, you did help out with Marilyn Stark in the one book about Lime a little bit, didn't you?
Oh yeah.
Could you tell what you did with that, please?
Well, I had a lot of original photographs in there, mostly in the color photography section. But most of the black and white work in there, she would go to the sources and borrow the pictures and bring them to me, and I would copy them and give her the copy and give the originals back to the people that owned them. So almost the entire book, I did all the photography, copying all the historical photos and taking the original photos that appeared in that book. They were all mine. And she was gracious enough to give me the recognition on the inside of the back of the flyleaf. So I had my picture in there and a little bit about my business. So I guess they sold out all the books now.
I think they did, yeah.
They're no longer available.
Just out of curiosity and all, what are your early memories of the museum when you first started coming here as opposed to what it looks like now?
My association with the museum really came on about the time that Mr. Percy died, and the archives from the locomotive works came to the museum. And then Ray Shuck was the head man here, and he contracted with me to do the printing. And at that time, I was so busy doing all the local industrial work, I told him that the only way I could do it would be as I was able to, time-wise, you know. It might take me a week to get at something, or maybe 2 weeks to get something done because I was so busy. Well, I all turned around and I got unbusy, and museum work became much more important to me than it was before.
Right.
So I was able to do the work pretty much as it came to me and delivered it within 2 or 3 days.
Right.
So that's the way it's been ever since. So who followed Ray Shuck?
That was Pat Smith, Patricia Smith.
I thought there was one in between.
After Ray was Pat, and now Amy.
Okay.
Because originally, and all, we had Joe Dunlap here and all that. And
Yeah, I didn't work for Joe.
did you ever meet Joe?
Yeah, I met him, but I met him at Mac Camera Store when I was a kid working there.
Okay.
He came into Mac's once in a while. Joe was a nice fella, and yeah, he was handsome too. He's a good-looking guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have any memories of the building itself, how it's changed, from what it looked like when you originally came here as to what it looks like now?
Oh, it's nothing like it used to be. This whole east side is all new, and it's much improved and much enlarged, and it's quite impressive now. And I guess it's like one of the best in the state of Ohio, if not the best.
We like to think so anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So the guys I talked to this morning said that they would like to come down and go through the place. They might come in today, I don't know.
Okay.
Probably this afternoon.
Are there any other areas, again, of your photographic work? I know you mentioned, of course, the various companies you worked for and other things. Is there anything else that kind of stands out that you'd like to highlight?
Well, I worked for 15 years for the International Car Company over in Kenton, Ohio, and they built cabooses, and I loved that work.
Okay.
And every time I went over to photograph a caboose, it was an all-day job. I had to shoot all the features, inside and out, and then I did some three-quarter view exterior, and then I did A-end, B-end to the car, and right side, left side, and anyway, I really liked that work. And then later on, after the first 6 or 8 years, I sold to a company called Pacific Car and Foundry.
Okay.
And then they started building railroad cars in addition to the cabooses. So I got to shoot all the railroad cars too. I really liked that work. Probably the best of everything I did.
Okay.
So they were like #1 in my favorite work, and then Clark Equipment was #2.
Okay.
Then Westinghouse Aerospace and Westinghouse Small Motor, #3 and 4. And Westinghouse Aerospace, their work was, you'd shoot a picture and you'd only make 3 prints. Well, you shoot a picture for Clark Equipment or for the caboose factory, you make 25 prints off of each shot. Well, a huge difference in volume,
Sure.
you know, so much more profitable. Make 25 prints than 3. So, and then everything for the aerospace plant was always super rush. You know, you had to get out there quickly and do the work, and then you had to deliver it quickly. And everything was an emergency. If it wasn't an emergency, it'd sit there on somebody's desk until it became an emergency.
Okay.
And then, so everything I got was always in the emergency stage, because they'd let it sit there till it became an emergency, and then they'd call me.
Right.
Yeah. So, ways of big industry
Mystery.
are a mystery to be solved. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, we talk about photography and such and all this. What do you really think about the quality of in the 40s and all that? Don Jardine was the official photographer of the Local Works. What do you think of his work?
Well, I printed hundreds and hundreds of his negatives, and they left something to be desired.
How so?
He didn't seem to know about yellow filters, and if you use a yellow filter on black and white film, the yellow filter lowers the contrast, and so all the railroad stuff is black, so it's hard to show the detail on the black without using a yellow filter. You have to way overexpose the film to get the detail out of it. And then the undercarriage, which was black and in the shadow, was difficult to discern. So the yellow filter fixed that. And but he didn't seem to know anything about the yellow filter. But what they did then, where the undercarriage would be weak, they would use a red dye called Nucozine,
Okay.
and they'd mix that up with, it was water soluble, and they'd use a cotton swab and swab that on to create density on those underexposed areas. And it really helped. And I had used some Nucosine early on in my career, but by the time 1960 came around, it was a thing of the past, because everybody knew how to get what the result that they needed without using that.
Okay.
But yeah, I always wondered why Don Jardine was considered the best industrial photographer that was ever in Allen County,
Okay.
when his work really wasn't that great.
What do you think of the quality and all before Don got here of some of the negatives? I know you processed a lot of those. Are they pretty much fairly so-so?
I don't know who did them. I don't know the difference. I don't know whose were his and whose weren't his.
Do you know of any, say before you, predecessors and such and all this, were photographers around here of any quality?
There's nobody I would recommend.
I just wondered beforehand, a lot of times we don't really have great records as to some of the early photographers. I know we don't, or the loco works, and we have no idea who took those.
I was the first and only photographer that opened shop in Lima that called himself an industrial commercial photographer.
Okay.
There had never been one before me.
Okay.
And anyway, by the time I had been in business a year, there was half a dozen listings in the Yellow Pages of other people who said they were industrial commercial photographers.
Okay.
Because they saw me and saw that I was successful, so they thought they'd cut themselves in on the business.
Right.
Well, I even had a guy go so far as to call me up and say, I'm thinking about going into the commercial photography business. He says, could I come talk to you? Would you tell me how to go about getting business and how to perform some of the more difficult tasks? I said, why would I do that? So why would I enlighten a competitor to take business away from me that I'm accustomed to doing? And he says, well, if that's your attitude, just forget the whole thing. I said, well, that's what I'm going to intend to do just as quickly as I can.
Right.
And the funny thing is, people sometimes judge you on the price of your product. And if your product is real high priced, they think you must be really good.
Right.
Not so,
Okay.
you know, not so. That doesn't prove anything.
Right.
So, well, photographers as a general have a poor reputation. They're unreliable. They make appointments and don't show up. They keep irregular hours. If they have a studio, they don't keep regular hours, so you're likely to go there and there won't be anybody there. And anyway, my boss gave me the ultimate compliment at Westinghouse. He said, Bill, I've known a lot of photographers, and you're the only real one
That's
I
great.
ever met.
Okay.
So I thought, gosh, that's
That's an outstanding one.
about the most impressive compliment you're ever going to get now.
Okay. Are there any recommendations you would give to anybody of the younger generation who would want to get into photography?
Don't do it.
Okay, I've heard that from a couple people now.
Don't do it. Tough way to make your living.
Okay.
Of course, nowadays it's much easier with digital
Right.
photography. It's much easier than it used to be. And the beauty of the digital photography is the ability to manipulate on the computer is just tremendous. You can do things on the computer through manipulating that you never could do in real life with film.
Right.
So I've enjoyed my connection with the digital, and everything I do today is digital, of course.
Right.
I scan negatives and I make enlargements and I improve and enhance negatives and improve the contrast,
You still do great work.
sharpen them. And you can do a lot of things on a computer that you couldn't do conventionally. But we did slide programs, gosh, for 20 years before the computer slides came around. But by the time the computer slides came around, why, it all went to PowerPoint. And so after PowerPoint was introduced, well, back up a bit. After using conventional photography methods, we went to computer slides, computer-generated slides, where you produced the computer, created it on the computer, and then you had to outsource to what's called a film recorder. And then you got the film, color slide back, mounted in a frame. And after PowerPoint came out, the computer slide business just quit. I mean, it was like turning the faucet off.
Right.
Because everybody in the factories, they all had computers and they all had technicians run them. So they started producing all their own visuals, and instead of outputting them to color slides, they output it to video, and then they just project the video images. So there's no photography involved, you know. None.
Yep.
Yeah. So when that was occurring, Ford Motor Company hired me to come out and train their technicians on how to create these color slides and how to judge the kind of fonts to use and how to judge the color combinations and all that. They paid me consulting fees to train their computer operators.
Okay.
So I did that. I spent, I don't know, a couple days there, probably only for a total of maybe 8 or 10 hours.
Okay.
But yeah, then once I had them trained, then there'd never be any work out of Ford Motor, you know, again.
Right, which that's sort of harkened back and all. Could you describe at all what it was like when you did the darkroom procedure and taking photos of the darkroom process and so on?
Oh yeah, when I first started, I started carrying a 4x5 graphic press camera in the 50s, and all the pictures we took were on 4x5 negatives, and they had to be processed. And when I went to work at Westinghouse, they had a two-year backlog of negatives that had never been printed because the guy that shot them didn't have time to finish them. So when I hired in as a darkroom technician, I went right to work on producing prints off of those. I made 200 to 400 prints a day, 8 by 10 glossy photos. Catching them up took me a year or so to catch them up. And then, but then they bought a big process camera, and that process camera was my baby from that point forward. I ran that camera.
What different chemicals did you have to use?
Oh gosh, well, photography when I began, it was all wet process. You had to expose it on an enlarger or a contact printer, and then you put it in the developer, and then you put it in the shortstop, which stopped the development, and you put it in the fixer, and then you would wash it, and you'd wash it maybe a half hour in running water, get the fixer out of it, and then you'd use a print flattener and glossing solution, which was glycerin, form of glycerin. And you dry it on a big rotating dryer that had like a chrome finish on the drum. And that's how you got the glossy finish.
Okay.
Well, I would print from 8 o'clock in the morning until 1:30 in the afternoon, and then it'd take me the rest of the day to wash, flatten, and to dry, so that I could be done by 5 o'clock, quitting time.
Okay.
And I took them all out and dumped them on our girl's desk, and she had to sort them and send them to the people that wanted them, you know, that they went to.
I think I can see why you enjoy digital now as opposed to all that.
Yeah, well, when I started my own business, my wife came down. She was at home at that time raising children, and she said, you know, I got a little time I could work part-time down here. And she says, what do you need done? I said, black and white dark room's what I need done. And she says, well, tell me how you do it. So I told her, and I'll put all these tanks out. And she says, there's got to be a better way of doing it than this. I says, yeah. Machine made by Eastman Kodak's called a oil print machine. It's a roller transport machine that costs $12,000. And she says, well, it'd be well worth it, wouldn't it? So I hadn't thought about buying one up until that point, but I thought, well, I ought to buy one.
Okay.
So I did. I bought one. I think I borrowed $5,000, and I had the rest of the money. Borrowed $5,000 on a 30-day note to Metropolitan Bank. Bought that machine, and I had so much black and white work at that time that I didn't have time to do it, and it was way too much for her. So Dave Frick was, I'd worked with him at Neon Products. I ran into him out at the mall, and he was walking around. He had a great big bushy red beard. And he looked like a bum. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, Dave, I said, what are you doing nowadays? He said, oh, I've been in poor health. He said, I had a brain tumor operated on. He said, I'm still in recovery from that. I said, well, you doing anything photographically nowadays? He says, no. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I got 50 acres. I'm farming part-time. I said, well, would you be interested in doing some photography? And he says, oh, absolutely. He says, I got to do something. So anyway, I hired him, and he went right to work. And he was the best black and white darkroom technician I've ever seen. He really did good work. He could take a terrible negative and make a showpiece out of the print.
Great.
Yeah, he was good. Yeah. In fact, one of the guys at Westinghouse, he said, Bill, you know, I hate to say this to you, but Dave Frick's better than you are.
Okay, I like that.
So he was, and
Okay.
doing black and white printing. And he gained his experience in the Army up at Elmendorf, I think it is, in Alaska.
Okay.
Yeah. And the Signal Corps in the Army trained a lot of photographers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where he got his training.
Now, are there any other areas of, say, your photographic stuff in Lima or just Lima in general and all this that you'd like to talk about? Or your career?
Oh, I don't know. I made slide programs for Vistron, and I made slide programs for Arbor Healthcare, and I did slide programs for Healthcare and Retirement Corporation, and Arbor and Healthcare and Retirement. They sent me out to photograph nursing homes.
Okay.
Now I would photograph exterior, all the exterior views, and then photograph all the sample rooms. They have 2 or 3 or 4 different type rooms at different prices, you know. I'd photograph each one of the rooms, did the lobbies, all that. So one time Harbor Healthcare sent me to Florida to do 5 homes. And I took a friend of mine, Paul Hutchison, along. He had recently retired. He sat in the car while I did my work. And then when I got done with the 5 homes, we went to Lake Okeechobee and bass fished for 3 days.
There you go.
We caught 68 bass in 3 days.
Not bad.
We'd go out in the morning at dawn, come in at 10:30, take a nap, eat lunch, go back out at 3 o'clock and fish till dark.
Okay.
Did that 3 days in a row.
Sounds like a good time.
68 bass.
Okay.
Yeah. There weren't any big ones. We wanted to catch a 10-pounder, but 6 is as high as we got.
Not bad.
But most of our fish were 2 to 3 pounds in that category.
Okay.
That was quite a trip.
Not bad.
Well, I shot a home in Lakeland, Florida, one in Jacksonville, one in Pensacola. I don't remember where the other 2 were. There was 5 of them.
Is Florida the farthest away you travel to take any shots?
Pardon me?
Is Florida the farthest away you traveled to take any of your photographic
Yeah,
work?
farthest. Well, I went to Kansas City. That's probably not near as far as Florida.
Depending on
I
where.
went to Kansas City and then drove 100 miles north and photographed a home there. And there wasn't any place to eat in this little town. One little coffee shop that had food. And I worked there all morning and I wanted to go to lunch. I said, well, where is there to go to lunch? And they said, one place, and they told me. So I went there and I walked in the door and immediately all the faces in there were all looking at me because they were used to seeing a stranger, you know.
Okay.
So I didn't bother to tell them why I was there
Sure.
or what purpose I was there for, but I thought that was interesting. A little farm type community.
Right. So if you had it to do over again, would you do anything different and all that? As to, or would you still like to be in the photography business if you could?
Oh no, I haven't really done much shooting for the last 15 years probably.
Sure.
Since I actually used a camera. I take a picture on the pond in front of my house once in a while, but I still enjoy doing the computer manipulation and the scanning.
Excellent.
I like to do that,
Okay.
but I've kind of lost interest in taking pictures. Where when all my children are growing up, we got album after album after album,
Sure.
full of pictures, you know.
Right.
Oh, I got hundreds and hundreds of pictures.
Okay.
But guys, the last 20 years, I haven't taken any pictures hardly,
Okay.
you know.
Is there anything again you'd like to add to this? Are we pretty well covered, you think?
Well, I had a kid that, he came to me for a job, and my daughter recommended him. He was a Bath High School student, and my daughter said, Denny Harsh is interested in photography. She said, would you be willing to talk to him? I said, no, I don't want to talk to him. She said, well, he's a really nice boy, Dad. I wish you'd talk to him. Well, I did talk to him. And anyway, he was in school at Dayton, University of Dayton, studying photography. And I thought, well, maybe he could do something, maybe he could help me. So I put him to work in the black and white room and in the color lab both. And he was the best employee I'd ever had.
Great.
Yeah. When he didn't have work to do, he'd empty the waste baskets and put a fresh roll of toilet paper on
There
the
you go.
dispenser, and he'd do everything that needed to be done. If he could see it needed to be done, he would do it. You know, and I thought, gosh, he is a good kid. He's a really nice kid.
Good.
Well, I went all over the northwestern part of Ohio and some outside of the northwestern, shooting photographs for Peterson Construction Company, and I let him go along, and he'd set the camera up and get it all ready and hold that out.
Ready?
Okay, one time we were up at Findlay. We were going to photograph the Whirlpool office building. Peterson Construction Company built it. And we were just setting up the camera in the driveway, and out comes this woman hustling out to meet us, and she had 5 or 6 young girls trailing behind her. And she said, "What are you doing?" We said, "Well, we're taking a picture for Peterson Construction Company." She said, "Well, you can't do that." She says, you gotta be approved by the communications director," and she named off three different officers of the company who would have to approve that. I said, "Well, lady, we can walk across the street and put a telephoto lens on and take this picture, and there's not a thing you could do about it."
Right.
She said, "Well, just the same," she says, you're not allowed to do that without getting permission." Well, anyway, Denny, all the while I was talking to her, Denny was setting up the camera. And when she turned around and went back in the building, he says, "We're all ready to go here, Bill. All I gotta do is pull the trigger." I said, "Okay, let's do it."
Okay.
So we shot the pictures and made the prints and gave them to Peterson, and no repercussions, none at all.
Okay.
People, dealing with people is a tough thing.
Is that one of the hardest parts of your job, or had been over the years?
Oh, yeah, I loved the work, but I hated dealing with the people. I had a lot of good people,
Right.
a lot of good ones, and that really appreciated what I did. But I had some duds, boy, ones that wouldn't pay you. Oh yeah.
Okay.
I asked my wife one time, I said, "Do I have fool tattooed across my forehead?" I said, "There's so many people look at me and seem to see the word fool." Yeah.
Okay.
She said, "No, you don't know." I said, "Well, I've always wondered why that is,
Okay.
I think it's because I was big and reasonably good looking and reasonably successful, and I think I just ticked them off."
Okay. Okay. That's possible.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for this interview, Bill, and I really appreciate that, and it's going to go nicely into our archives.